I'm the Member of Parliament here in Cambridge. And I used to be, before things went wrong and I became a politician, I was a scientist. And I used to work on a range of things, DNA, structure and function. So I'm sure you all know that DNA is a double helix. It can have lots of other shapes, and that's what I used to do my work on. And that involved using a whole range of techniques, physical techniques, biological techniques, a lot of computational work. But what I suspect I'm supposed to talk about today is about the interaction between the science, in the broader senses, and policy making. And I'll talk for a bit, and then I'm happy to answer questions about anything you like, as long as it's not about liquid crystals, because I won't know the answers. But it's also great to have you here in this wonderful building, the Isaac Newton Institute. It's always nice to see somebody here named after somebody very famous. What's the most famous thing you know of about Isaac Newton? Anybody know what he did? Stunned silence. This is slightly alarming.
Apple film and everything.
Sorry?
Apple film.
Yeah, there's some sort of stories like that. But actually had a really interesting history. He was actually Member of Parliament for Cambridge University. So he was one of my predecessors. He was not the most active politician ever. He was an MP for, I think, 7 years and spoke once in the entire 7 years, asking if a window could be closed. So it's always nice to know that I can do slightly better than Newton in something. He had also had a great sense of politics. He really was actually very successful at it. So, as you may know, he had a big argument with Leibniz about who really came up with the calculus. And he resolved this in a very sensible political way, which is that he set up a committee at the Royal Society, chaired by Newton, to determine who it was who had come up with it first. And he concluded that it was Newton. So, very, very sensible, and a great sort of starting point for evidence-based policy making. He was interesting in various other ways. He was probably the first scientist to really make money, which has now become, of course, the drive, as you have to use your science and research for financial benefit. He was the first scientist to make money because he became master of the mint. And so he was literally responsible for making all the money in the UK. And he actually brought Britain onto the gold standard, which had quite a significant effect, and did quite a lot of work on fraud as well. But of course, he was also a rather good mathematician, which I couldn't hope to aspire to. Lots of other things about him as well. He was his coat of arms, very unusual character. He was an alchemist, as some of you may know, but his coat of arms was white crossed bones on a black background. It's a rather unusual thing. But he did serve as a Member of Parliament for the University of Cambridge, because there used to be parliamentary seats for the universities as well as for the local area. So if you're a graduate of Cambridge, you got to vote for an MP for Cambridge University. And if you lived in Cambridge as well, you also got to vote for an MP for Cambridge. It was a very odd system. We used to be elected by something called the single transferable vote until 1945, when they were abolished. That's enough about Newton. I found it very odd trying to go into politics with a scientific mindset. It's a very different place, a very different way of doing things. And I'm still trying to get used to some of it. I'm a great believer in the idea of evidence-informed policy, that you collect evidence, and based on that you work out what to do. That's not the normal approach that's taken too often, and too often what happens is you work out what the answer is, and then you try to find reasons why it's the correct answer. And that's a real problem throughout politics. It's partly because there's only a handful of us who actually have a scientific training inside the House of Commons. So we have 650 members of Parliament, and 2 of us have science PhDs. So it's a relatively small minority. It's not actually having the doctorate that matters. I was at one point one of the world experts on 4-stranded DNA structures and computational prediction of where they would form. We rarely come up with that as a major debating subject. If it ever does come up, I am the person they need to argue it. But we do tend to talk about other things like taxes and roads and things like that more often than unusual quadruplex structures of DNA. But think about how you think about things. And there's a real issue I discovered as well, that you've probably seen headlines where they talk about politicians making a U-turn. You've seen these big headlines? Politicians change their minds. It's really odd. One of the worst things you can do as a politician is to change your mind on something. Whereas one of the best things you can do as an academic, as a scientist, is to test a hypothesis and then reject it. Any scientist, in the broadest possible sense, any researcher who says they've never had an idea that they have that data dismissed, really hasn't been trying. I came up with lots of ideas in my research career, some of which were completely untrue. I tested them, was quite happy to say I tried it, didn't work. In politics, you can't do it. It really is one of the worst things you can do. Margaret Thatcher, again, do you remember Margaret Thatcher? She used to be a chemist. But I'm glad somebody remembers that that she used to be Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister in the UK, of course. But before she was Prime Minister, she was actually a chemist. She worked at Unilever and came up with lighter, softer ice creams, which had less milk in them, sort of lighter in area. So she was very consistent through her career. But she also famously said that the lady is not for turning. She wouldn't change her mind on things. Tony Blair said, I have no reverse gear. You wouldn't buy a car that had no reverse gear and couldn't do a U-turn. But apparently what we want from politicians is to know what you're doing and to be consistent regardless of the evidence about it. We see this all the time. I had something just this week where there was a minister who said, we've did a consultation, and as a result, I've decided not to go ahead with one of the things I suggested. And this was seen as a weakness. I think it's a great strength when a politician can say, actually, having talked to people, I've learned a bit more. So it's a real challenge to get that evidence in, and you do find far too often that politicians know what conclusion they want and then try and find reasons to support it. I had another conversation with a minister just recently who was saying he'd been trying to get some advice from civil servants about an issue, and it took a long time to get anything, and it took him a while to realise this was because he hadn't told them what he wanted the answer to be. And they just weren't expecting to be genuinely asked for advice, because he didn't know which way he wanted to go. So there's a whole series of issues about it. I should say I'm going to talk for a bit more, and then I'm going to shut up and let you ask questions. We can talk about whatever you want to ask questions about. So you've got another 5 minutes or so to think of something to ask. If you don't think of anything to ask, I'm going to have to keep talking. So that's a threat. So I hope you'll come up with some things. Because the other thing I also want to talk about, there's how we use science and evidence and mathematics to influence policy. And there are real issues there, not just about this thing about testing, but it's also the fact that too many people, including the public, including the media, including politicians, are really uncomfortable with statistics and really uncomfortable with numerical thinking and some of the consequences of that. And so you see people extrapolating from very, very small numbers. You see all these sort of classic errors. But as well as issues about how we use science to inform policy, there's also issues about the policy of science. What is the purpose of research? Why do people do it? What should the state do? How much should we support research that has to be useful in the next few years? And how much should we support blue skies research? Now, I don't know of any of the work that you all do. The slides clearly vanish saying what sort of backgrounds you all had. How many of you think it will be useful in the next couple of years? A lot of excellent research is not useful when it's designed. When people started off with the laser or the internet or monoclonal antibodies or liquid crystals, indeed, I suspect at the very start nobody could say how big an industry that would be. Now, I don't know what the liquid crystal industry is worth now. Does anybody? 150 billion a year. So that's not bad. But if you'd written it on a grant application when you started, nobody would have believed it at all. So it's really quite hard to work out what you do. I have a very strong view that you need to support really good research. It doesn't matter whether it's useful or not. And then you need to encourage people to see if what they've come up with is actually useful. But it doesn't matter if it isn't, but you should encourage people to think. It's nice to have people who work on liquid crystals who say, actually, how could I use this? Not just the theory. I expect there's a lot more applications now than there were. And that links to questions about how much you should invest in research, how you should measure research. There's a thing at the moment here called the REF, trying to find out how good people's research is. And part of the problem is how can you go about measuring how good research is? What is the right return? What do we expect to get as an outcome? And one of the concerns is that it's actually it's changing people's behavior to try to fit to what's going to be measured. This is a very, very common problem. There's something called Goodhart's theorem. So Goodhart was a senior economist at the Bank of England. Very interesting family. One of his brothers is a lord, a Lib Dem peer. I think another brother is a very successful lawyer. Amazing family. But he said, anything you measure that's a proxy for something you care about stops being a good measure as soon as you tell people you're measuring it. So if you say to an academic that the number of papers you publish is a measure of how good you are, and historically it probably was, as soon as you tell people that's what you'll care about, people will just publish more papers. not necessarily better papers, and you'll get this concept of splitting papers up into the smallest publishable unit, because that's what is being measured. If you tell people, there was a time about 20 years ago where they started looking at measuring success by the number of companies that people founded, spin-out companies. And what happened was that on the day this started, some people, academics being quite clever, went and founded 20 companies. They don't have an idea of what the 20 companies would do, but it doesn't cost you very much to set up a company. And similarly, as soon as you tell people what you're going to measure, people change their behavior to fit. So we have to make sure we measure the things that really matter. One of the big issues in the UK has been about funding for science. We've managed to get that protected, but it's not a very rational, very rational approach to funding things. So if you're interested, I'll tell you the story of how we got protection in the science budgets. You may or may not be interested. We also have to work about how we get the right people here. So how many of you, don't answer it if you don't want to, are not British? Just, yeah, this is a fairly typical mix. Academia is an international pursuit. You know, people come and go, that's how it works. That's what it's all about. And Britain is, at the moment, going through a rhetorical phase, at least, where the political language is all about the problems we have from foreign immigration. And it's really damaging for science, for research, for industry, for everything in the high-tech space. We will do well when we get the best people from all around the world coming here. We want that. It's not that brilliant people coming here drive out the British people from working. So we have to try to make sure we recognise the fact that it's international. And actually the rules get made slightly better. Something I campaign for very heavily as an MP here is to try to have immigration rules that encourage the best people to be able to come here, rather than sending any messages to say that people shouldn't be coming in. There's a whole lot more I could talk about with this, but I'm getting near the end of the 5 minutes I was going to talk before you have questions. I hope you've had some. If you're interested in the full details of what I think about science policy, about these issues, I wrote a science policy paper for my party, the Liberal Democrats, which is available. It's now our official party policy. We're trying to implement as much of it as we can. And it deals with far, far more about education and how you teach science at schools, how you make that exciting, get people engaged, how you ensure there's diversity, how you should make use of scientific advice, how you should educate media and the public. But if you're interested in it's online at tinyurl.com/scipol, SCIPOL. So you can read the entire thing, and hopefully you'd all agree, even though it doesn't say that much about liquid crystals. That's more than enough introductory stuff from me, so I'm happy to talk about anything that people want to until I'm told to stop speaking eventually. So, are there any questions? Yeah.
Would this country be a better place if it would be a larger percentage of, let's say, PhDs in science would be a member of parliament and government?
Yes.
Think about that.
Yes, I think it would be a really good thing to have.
Could you repeat the question?
Sorry.
Is
The question was essentially, would Parliament be a better place? Would the country be a better place if we had more PhD scientists in Parliament? And yeah, I mean, I think the answer is a definite yes. I think the first thing we need to do, by the way, and I say this particularly to anyone who lives in Cambridge, is make sure we keep as many of them there as possible when the elections come round. I say that in a totally unbiased way. But no, I think it would be good. I think, again, it's not about necessarily having a PhD in science that matters. It's about having a mindset that understands the value of the science. So that's not quite the same thing. There are people, there's a guy called Phil Willis, for example, who chaired the Science and Technology Committee, who was a historian, that he really got science and what you needed to do with it. So you need people like that. But having more scientists in would be good, because it does come with that mindset already pre-trained, if you like.
And do you think the public will understand if, for example, if politicians get more into a vibe of making U-turns based on testing hypotheses? Do you think the public will understand? Because when I think a politician makes a U-turn, I think, oh, well, you thought about it, well done. But maybe my neighbor doesn't really understand these. Yeah, he thinks, oh, why did he change his mind? He must be up to something.
I think we can be more honest with the public, actually, and I think the public do understand quite well. There's a big difference between having a U-turn on how you would do something and a U-turn on what your core values are.
Yeah.
So, if you want to see greater social mobility, let's say, there are different ways of getting there. And some ideas will be good ideas, some ideas will be bad ideas, some just simply won't work. To change your mind about which one you would like to do strikes me as a sensible thing to do, learn from it. If you'd say, actually, I know I said I was really keen on getting greater social mobility, but actually now I just think we should make sure the rich get richer as quickly as possible. That's more of a fundamental change in values. So there's some things which are associated with values and some which are how you get there. Changing how you get there should be really sensible and easy to do, because we will learn more, we will come up with better ideas. It partly links, and a lot of people talk about evidence-based policy, and I try to say evidence-informed policy, because it's very rare that evidence tells you what the correct policy should be. It's very rare you can do in a sort of completely dispassionate way work out how to run an education system based on evidence, because we have to agree what exactly we're trying to achieve. What is education? I have a view on what education is, you have a view on what education is, we'll all have a view on it, but we won't necessarily agree, and we can't come up with some optimized function to get to. So values play a role. You should be clear what the values are, and you're prepared to listen to the evidence on how to deliver your values. It's quite a long answer, but there was something else I was going to say in response if there's no other hands, but yeah.
Some time ago, I actually read this article about saying that government usually tends to satisfy the population in the short term because they need to get re-elected in 4 to 5 years. So investments that could actually give some profit in 20, 30 years' time are usually pushed away, like nuclear fusion and something like that. And even though, how do you think you can explain to the population that if you sacrifice something now, you will get something later? I remember when the LHC started, many people were saying, why did the government spend so much money into it? Well, you could actually build more hospitals, more streets, or something like this.
You're absolutely right that because we have an electoral cycle, which is a good thing, there is an imbalance. It's not that you don't do anything long term, because there is very definitely long-term funding, even when it's sometimes controversial. The high-speed rail project, for example, which we're having here. But you're absolutely right that there is a pressure to push one way, to push slightly more short-term, slightly less long-term. We have to try to somewhat rebalance that. But it's slightly hard to know how far you want to rebalance it, because there is a need to do things. So there are lots of other issues as well to do with how government operates. That's not even to do with the electoral cycle. It's also to do with how much money you can spend on something. So quite often you'll be doing something inefficiently, but to get to a more efficient way of doing something costs money. And getting over the hurdle takes a long time. So, for example, we are generally very bad in the UK at investing in preventative measures, whether it's to do with health, social services particularly. And part of the reason is that we are so busy paying for the treatments that are needed now that we don't have enough spare money to also deal with prevention to stop people needing the treatments. If you could get over the hurdle, you could actually save a lot of money. There's lots of evidence that, for example, take something I'm particularly interested in. If you can encourage people to walk or cycle more, you make a fantastic saving because of the health benefits. The health benefits are absolutely huge. But you have to get the money in somehow to start with. So there are some efforts to try to come up with things that are like that. But you're right, we need to invest more in the long-term project. Fusion is a great example. We're 25 years away from having working fusion reactors that could provide commercial power. We've been 25 years away for the last 50 years. Sometime we'll be 20 years away. We might actually get there eventually. But it's hard. And also you find that decisions are made in the wrong ways. So still on the nuclear theme, we went for uranium reactors rather than thorium reactors ages ago, because uranium gave us bombs. Now we wish we'd gone the other way. That long-term thinking does happen, and a lot of things don't get caught up in the political discussion. There's a lot of things which just tick over because they never raise their heads often enough for anybody to notice. So some things do keep going. So, anyone else? I gave you long enough to think of some questions. Yes?
What do you think you can do to change the balance in Britain between people who do humanities and people who do science? Because I have the feeling, knowing some civil servants, that there are people in reasonably high jobs in civil service who have been tasked with giving advice on issues in which there is data from abroad and which requires at least a scientific background, and they're quite smart people, but they speak neither a foreign language nor can they understand any proper scientific reasoning.
So, and there's a number of answers to that. Let me give you two of them. So one of them is that we need to make sure that sciences are well taught at schools, particularly at primary schools. There is a huge lack of interest in science at primary schools, with exception, and there are brilliant teachers who get it and find it fun, but a very small proportion of primary school teachers have any sort of scientific background. And when I was working on my science policy paper, we had a debate at one of our conferences, and I was talking to a colleague who teaches primary school teachers. And she said that she'd asked, as she always does, groups to come up with a curriculum for primary school as an exercise. Not a single group included science on their curriculum. And when she asked why, they said, well, the thing about science is it's hard, it's quite dull, and it's not very useful. And if our primary school teachers think that science is hard, dull, and not useful, they're not going to encourage kids to get into it. There will be kids who would love it, who just, and let's face it, science can be really dull if you teach it badly. I can give a lesson, if I have to give a lecture that's really dull about science, I can manage it. And I can give you a long list of numbers and a few colours of things, and it's all that rote memorisation. There's an element of, but it's not really the core of science. Science is a fun, creative thing. So we have to change that. I think the other thing, which you touch on you were saying how do we get more people to do science rather than humanities, but your example was then about people who don't have a language or the scientific background. And actually I think one of the things we need to do is have a broader education. I actually think the fact that we expect people to specialise really quite early, are you a scientist or are you doing humanities, is really bad. It's particularly problematic for me that we have so many people who drop maths early and can drop maths early, and then go on for the rest of their lives actually struggling because they can add up. They have problems when it comes to financial mathematics, by which I don't mean how to become a banker, but how to work out a mortgage cost, how to work out the costs of an interest rate on your, the things that you have to do in a daily life. So I'd really like to see a form of maths to 18 for everybody that's not calculus, because the vast majority of people that probably don't want to do maths will never use calculus, or at least not knowingly. I mean, they will every time they catch a ball, but the stuff that you'll use every day, basic statistics, those sorts of things. I'd like to have a course on that. In the same way, because there's a real issue that nobody will say, yeah, I don't do words. But there are people who will say, I don't do numbers. It's sort of okay to not really care about numbers. So we have to change that. I mean, there's a lot of other steps that we need to do. I think also getting people to understand what a scientific career looks like. That if you do a physics degree, there are jobs open to you other than physics teacher. The whole breadth of things that one can do. We don't really get that across very well. So. I'll give you the second half of the answer I was going to give you while I wait for somebody else about getting more scientists in, because there's a real problem in our parliament about who is in the Commons. So we've got fewer scientists than we used to have, we've got fewer lawyers than we used to have, various other categories we have fewer of. People who are in the armed forces, farmers, various other things. What we have more of is people who have either come from a marketing, PR, advertising background, or who have been professional politicians who left university where they were in a debating society, got a job working for an MP, then got a job working for a government think tank, then got a job in government. Those are the two big growth categories. And both of those are much more interested in presentation than in fact. That if you're doing marketing, if you're doing advertising for a product, you have to say it's good. You don't have the option of actually saying, I've looked at it, it's actually a crap product. That can't be what you do.
They're quite brave.
It'd be a brave strategy. I mean, I think Skoda tried this actually, and it worked quite well for them. But fundamentally, you start off with the answer, which is the answer for a marketing thing has to be buy this product because it's good, which starts you off in a different place, and that's the background we have. So Ed Miliband was a professional politician. David Cameron was in marketing, PR beforehand. It's a huge thread. We have too many people like that, which is a world where you talk about spin. how do I persuade you that this bridge is beautiful, rather than how do I make sure it doesn't fall down.
And Tony Blair?
Tony Blair was he's a lawyer, but he sort of spent a lot of his time in and around politics. There are exceptions, but percentage-wise, we've seen a large increase in those people. So, yeah.
So how your scientific education helps you in your daily life as a politician, knowing that, I mean, you are dealing with people, and this is everything except rational. So.
Interesting question. Part of it is that interest in evidence, statistics. That comes up in quite a lot of the things which I do. I'm sure it informs me more than I realise in how I start to think about a problem. That I'm more happy looking at numbers and thinking if numbers sort of feel right. I'm that slightly obsessive person. I'll see a statement, it will say that 63% of the 17 people we asked said the following. And I'll think, no, it doesn't. No, they didn't. So I have spotted errors, and then you sort of drill down, and occasionally people are amazed at you. How can you claim you know this? I don't know the answer. I just know that this number can't give you this number. So it has a role like that. It also means you just see problems in a different way. So there are very sensible ideas that people want to have, which fall foul when you know a bit more. So some of you are chemists, I think. Hopefully some of you have done some chemistry. So there was a proposal 2.5 years ago to ban the use of explosives in classrooms. And that's very sensible. We don't want things in classrooms that might actually explode and kill people. Dynamite's a bit too dangerous to have inside. The definition they were using for an explosive was anything which is exothermic. Which is a rather broad definition. And, while technically if it's exothermic it will be generating energy, yes, okay. You don't have to know that much to know that that's a really bad definition to use. It would make school rather an interesting place to be. So there's just partly that sort of understanding knowledge. And actually part of it is also, because although I am a scientist, and although I have my training in that, it would be fair to say that the vast majority of areas of science I know very little about. But I hope able to talk to people who do and persuade them that I know enough that it's worth them spending some time explaining it to me. That my knowledge of liquid crystals is almost zero, but hopefully it's enough that somebody could explain what I need to know about something if there's an issue that comes up. And the broader concepts about science and about evidence. And actually one thing I'd say about lawyers is that they are actually quite good at looking at evidence. They have a slightly different way of thinking about it, but they actually do care about factual underpinnings. It does give you a certain mindset in how you think about things, which, I can't tell you just how bad some of the comments are. I don't, just give you a few examples. So, a lot of MPs, the majority of MPs are very well-meaning on these things, but they sort of, in many cases, went through school not really knowing science. It was a bit scary. You probably know people like this who just, they never quite understood it. It all seemed a bit complicated. It wasn't really their thing. They left it as soon as they could. They're not anti-science. They just don't really get it. There's a few of us who have an interest in science. And as I say, the PhD is not the important bit. It's the interest. And then there are a few who are just anti-science in the most spectacular way. The most extreme example is a guy called David Tredinnick, MP for Bosworth. You've heard of him, perhaps. He's very keen on alternative medicines. I don't know if you know what the term is for alternative medicine that works. Medicine. But he gave a famous speech in 2009. This gives you just one slice of what we sometimes have to deal with, where he was calling for more money to be spent on astrology research. And he said something like, the moon has a huge effect on our lives. For example, surgeons won't operate during a full moon because blood clotting is ineffective. Now, hopefully, if you are sensible, rational people, you won't believe me. So look up David Tredinnick on Wikipedia, and you certainly shouldn't believe Wikipedia, but you will find on his Wikipedia entry a link to the original Hansard transcript of his speech, where you will also be able to find a video of his speech. So, So what I said isn't maybe not exactly word for word, but it was, pretty much there. So this is, and this is a testable hypothesis.
What's his last name?
Tridinic. Tredinick. And you'll find it if you want later to read out the exact quote. You'll see it's almost word for word what I just said. But please do correct me if it's not. But it's a testable hypothesis. It's a really easy thing to do. Has anybody here ever cut themselves during a full moon and survived? You could test it by ringing up a surgeon and asking, do you operate during a full moon? And I have a friend who tried this and got a laugh. It's just so obvious. So we have a number of people like that. We had a debate about fracking. So this, how can you get basically shale gas out? Can you break up things underwater? Really complicated debate. There are some good reasons for it. There's some real problems with it. Happy to talk about it if you want. One MP said we shouldn't do fracking because it involves using chemicals, and we shouldn't use chemicals to make energy. Now, how do you have a rational conversation there? That it's not something where you can just say, look, we just disagree. One of us thinks it's safe, one of us thinks it's not safe. We can talk about the safety values. That's a conversation you just can't have. Have you found the quote? Or do you want to read out exactly what that bit says? Or?
No.
Okay. It definitely has the word effective in it.
Post it on Facebook.
So there are a number of cases like that, which are just, it's just quite hard to know how to do it. The ones who are broadly interested, you can just try to explain some things, because they're genuine people. They're the sort of people we all know who are just a bit scared and would like to know about it. But then there are a few who don't care. So, yeah.
How do you think we can counter this? How can you push more science people to go into politics and try to convince the people that are already in politics that get interested in science?
So there's a few things. I think one of the most important ones is that essentially every MP in the UK runs constituency surgeries. So later on today, I will go and do a surgery for 2 hours. I'll do another 2 hours tomorrow, where anybody can come and talk to me for a quarter of an hour about anything. No problem at all. I think it would be good if people went to see their MPs about issues. To say, not necessarily in a hostile way, just even to say, look, very interested to meet you. I work on this area. Here are some things which are quite important at the moment. There's a debate coming up, there's an issue coming up, whatever it might be. But I thought you also might just be interested in the sort of things which I'm doing. Because all MPs have to be experts in everything. And the secret I'll let you into is that we're not all actually experts in everything. So we rely on having people who will give us information. It's just not possible to know everything about everything that's going on. The world's too complicated. So if you can talk to somebody about an issue, they will listen to you. And they will understand, and they will start to build a relationship. I had somebody who came to one of my surgeries to talk about some technical issues, to do with IT and various other aspects to do with it. And I agreed rampantly with what he was saying, very much so. But he was quite an impressive guy, and we're still in touch. And so when other issues come up, he's the sort of person who I just text and say, look, there's this thing coming up. I don't really understand what this acronym is, or whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. What do you think? And we've built up that sort of relationship where I can essentially outsource some of the thinking to him. And that's really helpful. It doesn't mean I would just do anything he says, but I can learn. So if more people engage with their MPs and said, there's this proposal to ban exothermic reactions, I wonder if I could just have a quick chat with you about what that would mean, then they'll learn. And let's face it, most MPs don't know what an exothermic reaction is. That's fine. But rather than saying, well, they're an idiot, you can try to explain it. And a lot of them will go, oh, that sounds silly. We shouldn't be doing that. And I just picked that one example, but there are lots of others where in any field you'll find that. So building that relationship makes a difference. I think also, I was joking, well, partly joking earlier about the voting thing, but if you make it matter to how you vote, whether your MP is broadly pro-science or not whether they have a PhD or not, but broadly pro-science, then MPs will respond by trying to be a bit more pro-science. There's a big debate about homeopathy. Some of you will be familiar with homeopathy, the idea that if you dilute things massively, they somehow get more powerful. There's no evidence whatsoever for it, better than placebo. But, within the NHS, we have 4 homeopathic hospitals. There are 4 hospitals on the NHS which are providing things which have no evidence at all. I think they should save the money. There's a big debate about it. periodically there are proposals to support homeopathy that go down. Whenever that happens, there is a very organised campaign of people who support homeopathy. And by the way, I have no problem with homeopaths doing what they want to do. I just don't think the state should be paying for it. People can do all of these whether or not I think they work. That's fine. But there's an organised campaign of people who write to their MP saying, I want you to support the cause of homeopathy. And there's basically nobody writing in saying, actually, you shouldn't support it, you should support something else. So if people who care about evidence joined in with some of these things, then it would nudge MPs over, that there'd be more votes in being sensible and looking at evidence than not. So it means not just following party loyalty all the time, but having some things there. I'm going to get told off from the back now. Yes?
Well, you have touched on an example where people concerned with science tried to raise a voice against the homeopathists and were taken to court. And it's been a long and very unhappy saga, in fact.
There are various different ways of dealing with some of these things. But it's still the case that when there are motions, early day motions about homeopathy, virtually nobody writes even to me to say, I'd like you to oppose this.
Yeah.
Well, I do get letters from homeopaths.
No, I don't deny that. But if you're thinking of the engagement of science,
but the case that you're thinking of is which?
Well, where the scientists or pro-science people were actually taken to the libel courts, and there was a very expensive.
I think, but this was osteopaths, though, wasn't it? Chiropractors. Chiropractors.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah. So it's chiropractors with the Simon Singh case. You're absolutely right, and he was sued. He won the case, and partly as a result of that, we've changed the laws on defamation. So this is actually something I was very involved in. I used my interest in science not just in the science areas, but actually much broader. So we have new libel laws in the UK, Defamation Act 2013, which includes a clause which I fought quite hard to get, which says that anybody publishing peer-reviewed work, essentially, is completely protected from any libel action unless it was maliciously false. So if you do a study on homeopathy or on chiropractors or anything else which says that it has no effect, for you to publish that paper and for people to quote it and describe it and comment on it, it's absolutely protected from libel action unless you made up the data in it with the intention of doing down homeopaths. Frankly, if you're lying to trying to attack somebody, I'm not interested in protecting you. But if these are your genuine research results, whether it's a heart drug, and you say it doesn't work, whereas there's a big company which would like to say that it does, that's fine. As long as these are your results, that's perfectly fine now. So it was a big problem. We have, I think, now completely fixed it. So you can publish all of your work safely, again, unless you are deliberately lying. So please don't deliberately lie.
But what about the contrary case? The thing you mentioned with the MP who lied the other way, that surgeons don't do surgery during full moon. Shouldn't things like that also be prosecuted? I mean, at least.
I think I wouldn't make it an offence. I think we're trying to save some money here, and I think if we put people in jail, for example, for saying things which were silly, leaving aside any conceptual issues about free speech, I think it would be I don't think he should be prosecuted for having a belief. He genuinely believes this. I think he should just lose his seat. Because, but that's not up to me to control.
In a democratic way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a democratic thing. But it means that having people in his constituency who at some point might say, look, actually, it's a safe Conservative seat. But I wonder how many people there are there who go, yes, I'm a Conservative. Yes, I would normally vote for him, but he's an idiot. And I've had this, I have some family who are involved with the Labour Party. And the seat that they live in was only narrowly won by Labour. They won by 40 votes or something. And the MP there has a reputation, I'm not going to comment whether it's deserved or not deserved, for being the laziest MP in Parliament. And we're talking about after the election and said, so did you vote for her? I said, oh, of course. I said, but she has this reputation as the laziest MP in Parliament. I said, oh yeah, absolutely, but it's the right party. And if you vote for that, then you are asking people to be lazy. Whatever your party affiliation is, if you stick to your party, then you're saying we don't care what the person says. And so you have to have that little bit of flexibility to say, even if you end up disagreeing with somebody, it's possible to disagree with somebody on something, but to think they've reach that answer in a reasonable way. You know, that you know, anybody can look at the same evidence and come to different conclusions on it. That's fine. If you reward that electorally, that will help, or financially, or whatever it is, by getting involved if people are really good. That will make a big difference. It will start to nudge things over. Are you still looking for the quote, or are you? We'll look at that later. Yeah.
Isn't this a specific example of people voting for their beliefs instead of on a person?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, okay, of course, the person might be lazy, but he still represents the party, which represents the votes.
Yeah.
Also, yeah.
So you have to balance this. You know, if you just do what in Australia is known as a donkey vote, you know, but if you just vote for the party or whatever, then you'll get whoever's put up. You know, if you're in an area where a donkey wearing a blue rosette or a red rosette or a yellow rosette or whatever rosette wins, you'll get the donkey. You know, if they don't have to try, they won't. And there's lots of evidence that safe seats have a lower satisfaction level with their MP than competitive seats.
What do you mean safe seats?
Seats where somebody from a particular party is almost guaranteed to win. So we have seats where I think the seats now which have been won by the Conservatives since the 1830s, that nobody else has ever won. That's not going to generate, it will sometimes, but it's generally not going to generate the most hard-working MPs, because they don't have to. You know, so there's no incentive to actually really try, that you just win comfortably. So we need to have a bit more engagement with that.
Julian, I need to ask you, what are your timelines? Because these people want to take a photograph of with us. And I'm not sure whether you can use this for your election campaign, but they want to use it for their election.
Okay, what are you all standing for election for? I will come and...
Probably some scientific election.
Let me just check where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be somewhere at 3:30. I'm going from my sort of science hat to a language hat. It's the final of a spelling bee in different languages. So, you know, I'll be doing both bits of what you're asking for at the end of today. So, I mean, I should leave at about 3-ish, but I can leave a little bit later.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I have a question about if you look worldwide, scientists are the people who get scientists are the people among people who have the equivalent level of education who get underpaid. So what do you think about this problem, and do you come up any idea of? Because I think if you change this fundamentally, like scientists are the higher paid, then the whole scientific community will be different.
It's very interesting. I mean, I've heard this. I mean, it differs in different countries who is underpaid the most. I mean, in the UK, engineers are actually really quite badly paid, you know, surprisingly badly paid. And I think it's also important to say that money isn't, of course, the only driver. You know, that money is a factor in what people do. It's not the only one. Quality of life, societal respect matters as well. I think that's important. If you look at a number of European countries, for example, people's title is related to their qualifications. So, you know, in a lot of Europe, if somebody's an engineer, that will be their title. They'll be, you know, Engineer Smith, rather than just Mr. Smith. So that says, look, this is a respected thing to do. You know, it's not just medical doctors who get this title. You know, they're medical doctors, their honorary title that they all use. So it's that respect is part of it. But yes, also the pay. A huge number of scientists, and scientists do all sorts of different careers, some of which are well paid. But there is a real issue that it probably isn't rewarded for the economic benefits it brings in. I don't quite know how one fixes that easily. We need to, but you know, we should try to have that. I mean, there are various campaigns to get better remuneration, but if people will work for less money, it's quite hard to see how you force them to pay people more. So, I don't have a great answer for that. Sorry. I wish I did. I'd earn more money as well. So. Anything else quickly? You had one at the end, but anyone else who I haven't? You had a question?
We have a system of government science advisors, and it's a relatively new one.
Yep.
And is it working, and how does it compare with the other alternative of having more of us in Parliament, as opposed to a sort of set of paid flunkies, paid experts, of course.
I was going to say, you're very brave to call some of them flunkies to their face, but So we do have now a system of government science advisors in almost every single department. We've now reached the stage where it's all the ones that matter. So I mean, the law officers don't have one, but that's okay. The Treasury has one now, and they're generally very good. The real issue is whether they are listened to and whether they are given enough access and information, and that varies from department to department. So in some departments they have budgetary spend that's theirs to control, they have staff who work for them, they sit on the board, they have access to all of the papers, and in many cases there they really are powerful, they can do things, they can change things. In some departments they have none of the above. You know, they sort of sit in an office, slightly exaggerating, they sit in an office and if somebody asks them a question they can answer, but there isn't really. I did a series of questions a couple of years ago where I asked every department whether the Secretary of State, the top minister, how often they spoke to their chief scientific advisor. And it was really interesting because one department refused to answer, saying they meet several times a week and we're not prepared to count up how many. That's fine. That's what I'd like to see. How often do you talk to the person? Well, like really often. I don't know exactly, but fine. I don't want to know exactly whether it's 17 times in the last month or 80. Don't care. It's lots. Another department took something like 4 or 5 months to answer, and then said we met last Wednesday. I wonder why it took quite so long to give an answer. So there's a whole spectrum there. So some of them are. I think as individuals they're all broadly very good people. I think the challenge is getting them listened to. It's a great scheme that we have it. But what you need is more awareness and expertise at every level. You need awareness and expertise in Parliament. You need awareness and expertise in the civil service, at high levels inside government itself, in the journalisms. You need that whole spread. If you have a gap anywhere, it will cause problems. But I think the CSAs do generally a very good job. Yes?
I'm surprised by what you said just now about the law not having scientific input. Is there not a very serious problem with the treatment of forensic science, genetics, DNA, and so on, where there's a serious deficiency and there are very serious publicised problems?
Sorry, you're absolutely right. So there is a special department, which is the law officers, which is basically a small department, which is the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, and the Lord Advocate for Scotland. And they look at operation of the law. Forensic science is in the Home Office. A lot of these other things you talk about are in other departments. So the Law Office is a tiny one, and they are sort of legal experts who just work on the phrasing of the law and the exact processing of the law. So that's separate from the very key areas which you talk about. So those are in mostly Home Office, actually, where they they have some very good people, including a very good CSA, who advise on these scientific issues. The problem is that the Home Secretary doesn't always listen and isn't keen on proactively engaging. So the case of the Forensic Science Service closure, the very good, I don't want to personalise this, I know the CSA very well, I don't want to personalise this, but he wasn't consulted ahead of time because it wasn't considered to be a scientific issue. And so he didn't know about it until a long way down the decision, where he was involved quite late. And actually that's a department where I think he should sit on the board of the Home Office and have access to all of the papers, because at the moment the process in that department and a number of others is that they work out whether things matter scientifically, and then they ask the scientist for a comment. And what you need is something where the Chief Scientific Advisor says, hang on, that one we have something to say about. It has to be balanced that way. There's also, in the Home Office, famously, is just really bad at caring about evidence. And just in the last week we had a couple of examples. I have a number of clashes with the Home Secretary. I don't think she likes me very much as a result, but that's fine. We had a statement about stop and search powers. So this is powers for the police to stop people and search them. Big problems with how it's misused. And in particular, if you take just British Transport Police, people who are black or ethnic minorities are 31 times more likely to be stopped and searched, even accounting for numbers. Huge problem. So she had an announcement about a review of this. Really good. What I found really interesting, though, is she said at one point in it, I asked the Inspector of Constabulary to produce an evidence base for this. And their report will be coming out next week. I haven't seen it yet, but we're launching today. And as it happens, the consultation will last for long enough that the evidence can be fed in. But it's this idea of we're starting today and the evidence will be next week. Now, there was no need. It wasn't that something had suddenly happened. It was, to my mind, a sort of disregard for the importance of that evidence base. If it were me, I'd have done it on the day and say, right, we've just had the report which has all the evidence, now we're doing it. Would seem, it wasn't a crisis. It wasn't like, a volcano's exploded, we have to make a decision about ash clouds. You can't say we'll wait another month till we know more evidence. There's another example about cats banning a drug, where there was very clear advice from the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs. I wouldn't run the system this way anyway, but saying do not ban it. And she said, yes, well, thanks for all the advice. I'm going to ban it anyway. So it's the Home Office is not very good at evidence.
My question was informed because I'm the director of the institute, and we've been working with forensic scientists from UCL to create a program on forensic evidence based on probabilistic models of DNA and so on, and the law. And the issue has been to get the law commissioners and people who would be advised by the outcomes of this program to take them seriously. And I think that's where the challenge lies, because you can do all the science in the world, but if you're dealing with people who don't understand the outcomes.
Well, I'd be very happy to talk separately about the detail, about whether we can pass that on to the Justice Secretary, for example, who I talk to him quite regularly, so I'd be happy to take it up at that level. There is a bizarre thing with this, where it was decided in the courts a few years ago, as you probably know, that Bayesian inference could not be taught in a court. There's a specific ruling.
This is the kind of thing that
This was about DNA evidence. So, yeah, very, very strange legal decision. But that has other background. But I'm very happy to take on this particular thing. So I should probably
Can I ask a personal question?
depends what it is.
Right. You are, at least some of us, a rather young man. Do you think you'll be returning to DNA?
Well, I'm certainly planning to get older. So I'm working on that. I'm working on that. I have this wonderful time travel machine. It's just I can't change the pace from one day a day. I'm hoping to get. I'm definitely going to stand for re-election in 2015. I hope to be re-elected. Those of you who live in Cambridge, obviously, this is in your control. And I hope to keep going. I loved the work that I did and the research I did. I really enjoyed it. I think I'm able to do more to benefit science by doing what I do now than by any of the research that I was doing. So I hope to get re-elected. I'm currently on leave from my lectureship, so if I don't get re-elected, I'll probably come back and have to do lectures or something. But I hope to get re-elected. But we'll see. We'll see.
They'll give you good marks. We have questionnaires about lectures.
Right. Well, if you're good marks, welcome. But then equally, if you want to come, April and May 2015, I can give a very active training course in campaigning techniques if you're ever interested. Really hands-on. But thank you very much for listening anyway. I hope it was vaguely consistent with what it was. And I mention the word liquid crystals every now and then. So I hope
we need you to sit here next to me, apparently, in order that the campaign photograph can be taken.
Fine.
The lady at the back will take it from the stage. So is it here you want?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Well, thank you very much.